Question 1. Quality control measures reveal that a concerned citizen in Mobile, Alabama, has reported observing a dog chained in a backyard for several days with no visible food or water. The citizen states the dog appears lethargic and underweight. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for an animal control officer to take under Alabama state animal cruelty laws? Option A. Initiate a formal investigation by visiting the property to assess the animal's condition, gather evidence, and interview the owner, adhering to established protocols for animal cruelty reports. Option B. Advise the reporting citizen to provide food and water to the animal themselves, as direct intervention by the citizen is the quickest solution. Option C. File a report with the local sheriff's department and await their instructions before taking any action. Option D. Immediately seize the dog based on the citizen's report to prevent further suffering, without conducting an initial investigation. Correct answer is A. Initiate a formal investigation by visiting the property to assess the animal's condition, gather evidence, and interview the owner, adhering to established protocols for animal cruelty reports. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the immediate need to act on a report of potential animal cruelty while balancing the rights of the animal owner and the legal requirements for intervention. The challenge lies in gathering sufficient information to justify intervention without overstepping legal boundaries or causing undue distress to the animal or owner. Alabama law, like most jurisdictions, requires a certain threshold of evidence and specific procedures to be followed before an animal can be seized or an owner cited for cruelty. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves initiating a formal investigation based on the reported information. This approach is correct because it aligns with Alabama's animal cruelty statutes, which typically require an investigation to establish probable cause before any enforcement action, such as seizure of an animal or issuance of citations, can be taken. This process ensures that interventions are legally sound, based on evidence, and respect due process for the animal owner. It allows for the collection of evidence, assessment of the animal's condition by qualified personnel, and consultation with legal authorities if necessary. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately seizing the animal based solely on a neighbor's report without further investigation. This is a regulatory failure because Alabama law generally requires probable cause, often established through an investigation, before an animal can be seized. Such an action could be considered an unlawful seizure, violating the owner's property rights and potentially leading to legal repercussions for the investigating party. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the report entirely without any follow-up. This is an ethical and regulatory failure, as it neglects the duty to investigate credible reports of animal suffering. Alabama's animal cruelty laws are designed to protect animals, and ignoring a report, even if it turns out to be unfounded, fails to uphold this protective mandate and could result in continued suffering for an animal. A third incorrect approach is to confront the owner aggressively and demand immediate changes without documenting observations or understanding the full context. While communication is important, an aggressive, undocumented confrontation lacks the procedural rigor required by law. It may not yield the necessary evidence for a formal case and could escalate the situation unnecessarily, hindering a proper investigation and potentially alienating the owner from cooperating with legitimate interventions. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should follow a structured decision-making process. First, gather all available information from the report, noting specific details about the alleged cruelty and the animal's condition. Second, consult relevant Alabama statutes and departmental policies regarding animal cruelty investigations and animal seizure procedures. Third, initiate a formal investigation, which may involve site visits, interviews, and veterinary assessments to gather objective evidence. Fourth, document all findings meticulously. Finally, consult with legal counsel or supervisors to determine the appropriate course of action based on the evidence and legal requirements. Question 2. Quality control measures reveal that a veterinarian in Montgomery, Alabama, has treated a dog for severe, untreated lacerations and signs of chronic malnutrition. The owner claims the injuries were sustained during an unsupervised encounter with wildlife. However, the veterinarian's examination suggests the injuries are inconsistent with a single wildlife encounter and may indicate ongoing neglect or intentional harm. Considering the definition and scope of animal law in Alabama, What is the most appropriate course of action for the veterinarian? Option A. Report the situation to the Alabama Veterinary Medical Association for their review, without directly involving law enforcement or animal control unless the association deems it necessary. Option B. Advise the owner on proper animal care and nutrition, document the conversation, and consider the matter resolved unless further evidence of abuse arises. Option C. Document the findings thoroughly, report the suspected neglect or abuse to the local animal control agency or law enforcement as required by Alabama law, and provide appropriate veterinary care. Option D. Focus solely on treating the dog's immediate medical needs and refrain from reporting the suspected abuse, as it is the owner's responsibility to report themselves if they have violated any laws. The correct answer is C. Document the findings thoroughly, report the suspected neglect or abuse to the local animal control agency or law enforcement as required by Alabama law, and provide appropriate veterinary care. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent ambiguity in defining animal law and its broad application across various legal domains. A veterinarian in Alabama must navigate this complexity to ensure compliance with state statutes and ethical obligations, particularly when encountering situations that blur the lines between veterinary practice, animal welfare, and potential criminal activity. Careful judgment is required to correctly identify when a situation falls under the purview of animal law and necessitates specific reporting or intervention beyond standard veterinary care. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves recognizing that Alabama animal law encompasses a wide range of statutes designed to protect animals from cruelty, neglect, and abuse, as well as regulations governing animal ownership, care, and public health. When a veterinarian encounters evidence of potential animal mistreatment, such as severe untreated injuries indicative of neglect or physical abuse, their professional obligation extends to understanding the reporting requirements mandated by Alabama law. This includes knowing when and to whom to report suspected abuse or neglect to relevant authorities, such as local animal control or law enforcement, as outlined in Alabama Code Title II, Chapter 15, Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. Adhering to these reporting duties is paramount for upholding both legal and ethical standards in veterinary practice. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to dismiss the observed injuries as solely a matter of owner discretion or a consequence of normal animal behavior, without considering the possibility of neglect or abuse. This fails to acknowledge the protective intent of Alabama's animal welfare statutes and could result in a failure to report a situation where intervention is legally and ethically required. Another incorrect approach is to assume that all animal welfare concerns fall under the exclusive jurisdiction of veterinary professional ethics, thereby neglecting specific statutory reporting obligations. While professional ethics guide veterinary conduct, they do not supersede legal mandates. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to report the situation to an inappropriate agency that lacks the authority or mandate to investigate animal cruelty or neglect under Alabama law, thereby hindering timely and effective intervention. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a proactive and informed approach. This involves maintaining a current understanding of Alabama's animal welfare laws and regulations. When presented with a situation that raises concerns about an animal's well-being, professionals should first assess the situation against the definitions and prohibitions outlined in the relevant statutes. If there is a reasonable suspicion of cruelty, neglect, or abuse, the next step is to identify the appropriate reporting channels as defined by Alabama law. Consulting with legal counsel or professional veterinary organizations can also provide guidance in complex or ambiguous cases. The decision-making process should prioritize the animal's welfare and legal compliance. Question 3. Benchmark analysis indicates that a veterinarian in Alabama is presented with an animal that appears to have been recently acquired from an individual who may be operating as an unlicensed exotic animal dealer. The animal exhibits signs of neglect and potential mistreatment. What is the most appropriate course of action for the veterinarian to ensure compliance with the Federal Animal Welfare Act and protect the animal's welfare? Option A. Immediately contact the USDA Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, APHIS, to report the situation and seek guidance on the animal's care and the potential AWA implications. Option B. treat the animal for its immediate medical needs, and advise the owner to keep the animal hidden to avoid any potential AWA scrutiny. Option C. Treat the animal and then release it back to the owner without further documentation or reporting, assuming the AWA does not apply if the individual is not officially licensed. Option D. Treat the animal and then recommend the owner relocate the animal to a different state to avoid any potential AWA violations in Alabama. The correct answer is A. Immediately contact the USDA Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, APHIS, to report the situation and seek guidance on the animal's care and the potential AWA implications. Explanation: Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a veterinarian to balance the immediate needs of an animal with the legal obligations imposed by the Federal Animal Welfare Act, OWA, and Alabama state regulations. The veterinarian must act ethically and legally, ensuring the animal receives appropriate care, while also adhering to reporting requirements and avoiding actions that could be construed as circumventing the AWA's provisions for licensed dealers or exhibitors. The potential for misinterpretation of the AWA's scope and the consequences of noncompliance necessitate careful judgment. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves immediately contacting the USDA Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, APHIS, to report the situation and seek guidance. This approach is correct because the AWA, as enforced by USDA APHIS, mandates reporting of certain animal welfare concerns, particularly when dealing with animals that may fall under the purview of licensed dealers or exhibitors. By proactively engaging with the regulatory body, the veterinarian ensures compliance with federal law, facilitates a proper investigation, and upholds ethical standards by prioritizing the animal's welfare within the legal framework. This aligns with the veterinarian's duty to report suspected violations and to seek expert guidance when faced with complex regulatory situations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to treat the animal without reporting the circumstances to USDA APHIS, assuming the AWA does not apply because the individual is not a licensed dealer. This is incorrect because the AWA's provisions extend to the animals themselves, and if the animal's origin or intended use suggests it might be part of a regulated activity, failure to report could be a violation. A veterinarian cannot unilaterally determine the applicability of the AWA without consulting the enforcing agency. Another incorrect approach is to advise the owner to simply disappear with the animal to avoid any potential AWA scrutiny. This is professionally and ethically unacceptable. It actively obstructs a potential investigation into animal welfare concerns and could be interpreted as aiding in the circumvention of federal law. It also fails to ensure the animal receives appropriate long-term care or that its welfare is adequately addressed within the legal framework. A further incorrect approach is to treat the animal and then release it back to the owner without any documentation or reporting, assuming the situation is resolved. This is incorrect because it neglects the potential for ongoing AWA violations by the owner, especially if the animal was acquired or is being kept in a manner inconsistent with the Act's requirements. Proper documentation and reporting are crucial for ensuring accountability and for the protection of animals in the future. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical responsibility. This involves 1. Identifying the potential regulatory framework, in this case, the Federal Animal Welfare Act and relevant Alabama laws. 2. Assessing the facts of the situation to determine if they trigger any reporting obligations or legal requirements. 3. Consulting with the relevant regulatory authority, USDA APHIS, when there is any doubt about applicability or reporting duties. 4. Acting in the best interest of the animal's welfare while strictly adhering to all legal mandates. This systematic approach ensures that actions are both legally sound and ethically defensible. Question 4. The assessment process reveals that a veterinarian in Mobile, Alabama, is treating a dog that exhibits signs of severe neglect, including emaciation and untreated skin lesions. The owner claims financial hardship and promises to improve the dog's care, but the veterinarian has observed a pattern of delayed treatment and inadequate living conditions over several visits. What is the most appropriate course of action for the veterinarian to take under Alabama animal welfare laws? Option A. Advise the owner to surrender the dog to a shelter and then take no further action, as the responsibility has been transferred. Option B. Immediately confiscate the dog from the owner's property to prevent further suffering, assuming this is within the veterinarian's authority. Option C. Report the suspected neglect and abuse to the Mobile County Humane Society or local law enforcement, while continuing to educate the owner on proper care and documenting all findings. Option D. Accept the owner's assurances of future improvement and continue treatment without reporting, trusting the owner will rectify the situation. Correct answer is C. Report the suspected neglect and abuse to the Mobile County Humane Society or local law enforcement, while continuing to educate the owner on proper care and documenting all findings. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent conflict between a veterinarian's duty of care to an animal and the owner's property rights, particularly when the owner's decisions may lead to animal suffering. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing interests within the specific legal framework of Alabama. The correct approach involves prioritizing the animal's welfare by reporting suspected abuse or neglect to the appropriate Alabama authorities, such as the local humane society or law enforcement, while also attempting to educate the owner about their responsibilities under Alabama law. This aligns with the ethical obligations of veterinarians to prevent and relieve animal suffering, and is supported by Alabama statutes that empower authorities to intervene in cases of animal cruelty and neglect. The veterinarian's professional judgment, informed by their knowledge of animal health and welfare, is crucial in identifying situations that warrant intervention. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the owner's assurances without independent verification, even if the owner expresses remorse or promises to change their behavior. This fails to address the immediate risk to the animal's well-being and neglects the veterinarian's ethical and legal duty to report suspected cruelty or neglect. Alabama law does not permit a veterinarian to ignore clear signs of suffering based solely on an owner's promise. Another incorrect approach is to immediately seize the animal without proper legal authorization. While the veterinarian may feel compelled to act, taking possession of an animal without a court order or the explicit consent of the owner, unless in immediate, life-threatening danger and reporting is simultaneously initiated, could lead to legal repercussions for the veterinarian and potentially jeopardize the case against the abuser. Alabama law outlines specific procedures for animal seizure and impoundment, which must be followed. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to remain silent and do nothing, fearing repercussions from the owner. This is a clear abdication of professional responsibility and a violation of ethical principles. Alabama's animal cruelty laws are designed to protect animals, and veterinarians are often considered mandatory reporters, or at least have a strong ethical imperative to report suspected violations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough assessment of the animal's condition and the owner's behavior. If there is a reasonable suspicion of abuse or neglect, the next step is to consult relevant Alabama statutes and ethical guidelines. This should be followed by open communication with the owner, attempting to educate them and encourage compliance with animal welfare standards. If the situation remains unresolved or the risk to the animal is significant, reporting to the appropriate authorities is the paramount professional and legal obligation. Question 5. Market research demonstrates a growing public interest in understanding the legal protections afforded to animals in Alabama. To effectively advise clients and ensure compliance with state statutes, what is the most accurate and legally sound method for interpreting the current state of animal law in Alabama, considering its historical development? Option A. An assumption that Alabama's animal welfare laws have remained unchanged since their initial enactment, applying the oldest available legal interpretations. Option B. Prioritizing potential economic benefits for animal-related industries over the established legal protections for animals, regardless of their historical or current statutory basis in Alabama. Option C. A comprehensive review of Alabama's legislative history concerning animal cruelty and welfare, tracing the evolution of statutes and relevant case law from early common law principles to the present-day Alabama Code. Option D. Reliance on general ethical guidelines for animal welfare, assuming these universally apply and supersede any specific state-level historical legal interpretations. The correct answer is C. A comprehensive review of Alabama's legislative history concerning animal cruelty and welfare, tracing the evolution of statutes and relevant case law from early common law principles to the present-day Alabama Code. Explanation: the scenario presents a professional challenge due to the evolving nature of animal welfare legislation in Alabama and the need to interpret historical precedents within the current legal framework. Professionals must exercise careful judgment to ensure compliance and ethical treatment of animals, recognizing that past practices may not align with contemporary standards or legal requirements. The best approach involves a thorough examination of Alabama's legislative history concerning animal cruelty and welfare, specifically tracing the evolution of statutes from early common law principles to the present-day Alabama Code. This requires understanding how societal views on animal sentience and rights have influenced legal protections over time. By referencing foundational Alabama cases and legislative acts that progressively defined and expanded animal protections, such as those addressing neglect, abuse, and abandonment, one can establish a robust understanding of the current legal landscape. This method is correct because it grounds the interpretation of animal law in Alabama's specific statutory and judicial history, ensuring that any actions or advice are consistent with the state's established legal trajectory and its commitment to animal welfare as codified and interpreted within Alabama. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on general ethical principles of animal welfare, without consulting Alabama's specific statutory provisions and their historical development. While ethical considerations are important, they do not supersede or replace the legal requirements established by the state legislature. This approach fails because it lacks the necessary legal grounding and could lead to actions that, while perhaps ethically sound in a vacuum, are not legally permissible or sufficient under Alabama law. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that animal welfare protections in Alabama are static and have not undergone significant legislative changes. This overlooks the dynamic nature of law, where societal values and scientific understanding continually shape legal frameworks. Failing to acknowledge the historical development means potentially applying outdated standards or interpretations that are no longer legally valid in Alabama, leading to noncompliance. Finally, an approach that prioritizes economic interests over established animal welfare laws, even if those laws have historical roots, is fundamentally flawed. Alabama's animal welfare statutes, as they have evolved, reflect a legislative intent to protect animals from harm, and these protections are legally binding regardless of potential economic impacts. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multifaceted approach. First, identifying the specific legal jurisdiction, Alabama in this case. Second, researching the relevant statutes and their historical evolution within that jurisdiction. Third, consulting case law that interprets these statutes. And fourth, considering any relevant ethical guidelines, ensuring that legal compliance remains the paramount concern. Question 6. Compliance review shows that a commercial kennel in Alabama is operating with enclosures that meet the minimum square footage requirements stipulated by state law, but the animals are housed in a manner that limits their ability to move freely and interact naturally. The kennel owner argues that since the enclosures meet the legal size, no further action is required. Which approach best addresses the potential animal welfare concerns in this scenario according to Alabama's regulatory framework? Option A. Implement modifications to the enclosures to allow for greater freedom of movement and natural interaction, even if it requires additional space or resources, to proactively enhance animal well-being and align with the ethical principles of animal welfare. Option B. Focus solely on ensuring the animals receive adequate food and water, as these are the most critical aspects of animal welfare and are legally mandated, while maintaining the current enclosure configuration. Option C. Continue operating with the current enclosure sizes, as they strictly adhere to the minimum legal square footage requirements, and no explicit violation of Alabama law has occurred. Option D. Reclassify the animals as livestock to potentially fall under different, less stringent regulations, thereby justifying the current enclosure limitations. The correct answer is A. Implement modifications to the enclosures to allow for greater freedom of movement and natural interaction, even if it requires additional space or resources, to proactively enhance animal well-being and align with the ethical principles of animal welfare. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the economic interests of a business and the ethical considerations surrounding animal welfare. Alabama law, like many jurisdictions, seeks to balance these competing interests. A professional in this situation must navigate the specific legal requirements of Alabama's animal welfare statutes, while also considering the broader ethical implications of animal treatment, which can sometimes extend beyond minimum legal standards. The challenge lies in identifying the legally permissible actions that also align with responsible and ethical animal husbandry practices. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves prioritizing actions that demonstrably improve the living conditions and health of the animals, aligning with the spirit and letter of Alabama's animal welfare laws. This means implementing measures such as providing adequate space, appropriate nutrition, and prompt veterinary care, even if these exceed the absolute minimum requirements. Alabama law, particularly concerning livestock and companion animals, emphasizes preventing cruelty and ensuring humane treatment. Adopting practices that proactively address animal well-being, rather than merely avoiding explicit violations, reflects a commitment to ethical stewardship and robust compliance, thereby minimizing the risk of both legal penalties and reputational damage. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to focus solely on meeting the bare minimum legal requirements for animal housing and care, without considering the animal's overall well-being or potential for suffering. This approach risks overlooking subtle indicators of distress or discomfort that, while not explicitly illegal, could lead to welfare issues and potential future violations. It fails to embrace the proactive ethical dimension of animal welfare. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize cost savings over animal comfort and health, leading to decisions that might technically comply with regulations, but are detrimental to the animal's quality of life. For instance, underfeeding or delaying necessary veterinary treatment to save money, even if the animals are not yet exhibiting severe signs of neglect, is ethically unsound and could be interpreted as a failure to provide adequate care under Alabama law. A third incorrect approach is to dismiss concerns about animal welfare by arguing that the animals are primarily for commercial purposes, and therefore their comfort is secondary to profit. This perspective fundamentally misunderstands the legal and ethical obligations towards animals, regardless of their intended use. Alabama's animal welfare statutes apply to all animals under human care, and commercial intent does not negate the duty to prevent cruelty and ensure humane treatment. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of Alabama's specific animal welfare statutes. This framework should then incorporate an ethical lens, considering what constitutes humane treatment beyond the minimum legal standards. When faced with choices that impact animal welfare, professionals should ask, does this action uphold the dignity and well-being of the animal? And does this action align with both the letter and the spirit of Alabama's animal welfare laws? Prioritizing proactive measures that enhance animal welfare, even at a modest additional cost, is the most responsible and legally sound approach. Question 7. Market research demonstrates a growing need for animal sheltering services in rural Alabama. A newly formed nonprofit organization plans to establish an animal shelter in Greene County, Alabama. To ensure the shelter operates legally and ethically from its inception, what is the most prudent course of action regarding licensing and registration? Option A. Focus solely on securing adequate funding and volunteers, with the intention of addressing licensing and registration requirements only if specifically requested by authorities. Option B. Assume that operating as a nonprofit organization exempts the shelter from most state and local licensing and registration procedures for animal facilities in Alabama. Option C. Rely on general animal welfare best practices and obtain registration with a reputable national animal welfare organization, assuming this covers all necessary legal obligations. Option D. Proactively identify and meticulously fulfill all Alabama-specific licensing and registration requirements for animal shelters, including those mandated by the Alabama Department of Agriculture and Industries and any relevant Greene County ordinances. The correct answer is D. Proactively identify and meticulously fulfill all Alabama-specific licensing and registration requirements for animal shelters, including those mandated by the Alabama Department of Agriculture and Industries and any relevant Greene County ordinances. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires navigating the specific licensing and registration requirements for animal shelters in Alabama, which are designed to ensure public safety, animal welfare, and proper record keeping. Failure to adhere to these regulations can result in penalties, operational disruptions, and harm to the animals the organization aims to protect. The core challenge lies in accurately identifying and fulfilling all necessary steps within the Alabama framework, distinguishing between general best practices and legally mandated procedures. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves proactively identifying and meticulously fulfilling all Alabama-specific licensing and registration requirements for operating an animal shelter. This includes understanding the Alabama Department of Agriculture and Industries regulations regarding animal shelters, obtaining any necessary permits or licenses, and ensuring compliance with local ordinances in the specific county of operation. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the legal obligations outlined in Alabama law, prioritizing regulatory compliance to ensure the shelter operates legally and ethically. It demonstrates a commitment to animal welfare and public trust by adhering to established standards. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that general animal welfare principles are sufficient for legal operation, without investigating Alabama's specific licensing and registration mandates. This fails to acknowledge that legal requirements often go beyond general ethical guidelines and can include specific documentation, inspection protocols, and fee structures mandated by the state. Another incorrect approach is to only seek registration with a national animal welfare organization. While such registration can be beneficial for credibility and access to resources, it does not substitute for state-level licensing and registration required by Alabama law. This approach overlooks the primary legal authority governing shelter operations within the state. A further incorrect approach is to delay or neglect the registration process, operating under the assumption that it can be completed later or that enforcement will be lenient. This demonstrates a disregard for legal obligations and exposes the organization to potential fines, closure, and reputational damage. It prioritizes expediency over lawful operation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach licensing and registration by first identifying the governing state agency, in Alabama, typically the Department of Agriculture and Industries for animal facilities. They should then thoroughly review the specific statutes and administrative codes pertaining to animal shelters. This involves understanding application procedures, required documentation, e.g., proof of nonprofit status, facility plans, veterinary care protocols, inspection requirements, and renewal processes. Consulting with local authorities and potentially seeking legal counsel specializing in nonprofit or animal law in Alabama can further ensure comprehensive compliance. The decision-making process should prioritize proactive research and adherence to legal mandates over assumptions or shortcuts. Question 8. The risk matrix shows a situation in Alabama where a rare native bird, exhibiting signs of distress due to a tracking device, is part of a critical population study. The study's protocols dictate minimal intervention to avoid influencing behavior, but the bird's condition is visibly deteriorating. What is the most ethically and legally sound course of action for the wildlife biologist? Option A. Immediately remove the bird from the study area and release it elsewhere, prioritizing its immediate relief without considering the potential impact on the study or the bird's suitability for a new environment. Option B. Temporarily remove the bird to address the distress caused by the device, while simultaneously developing a plan to reattach a less intrusive device or find an alternative monitoring method, ensuring minimal disruption to the study's long-term objectives. Option C. Report the situation to a supervisor and await further instructions, even if the bird's condition worsens significantly during the waiting period. Option D. Continue monitoring the bird without intervention, adhering strictly to the study's protocols, on the grounds that the long-term conservation of the species outweighs the immediate discomfort of one individual. The correct answer is B. Temporarily remove the bird to address the distress caused by the device, while simultaneously developing a plan to reattach a less intrusive device or find an alternative monitoring method, ensuring minimal disruption to the study's long-term objectives. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a potential conflict between the immediate welfare of an animal and the long-term goals of a conservation program in Alabama. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing immediate ethical obligations towards an individual animal with broader, potentially species-level benefits. Careful judgment is required to navigate the complex philosophical underpinnings of animal welfare and conservation ethics within the specific legal framework of Alabama. The best approach involves prioritizing the immediate, demonstrable suffering of the individual animal, while simultaneously seeking to mitigate any negative impact on the conservation program. This means intervening to alleviate the animal's distress, even if it requires a temporary deviation from the program's strict protocols, and then immediately working to reintegrate the animal or find an alternative solution that respects both its welfare and the program's objectives. This aligns with the ethical imperative to prevent unnecessary suffering, a core principle often reflected in animal welfare legislation, and demonstrates a commitment to responsible stewardship. Alabama law, while focused on preventing cruelty, also recognizes the importance of humane treatment, which extends to minimizing suffering in managed populations. An approach that prioritizes the conservation program's long-term goals above the immediate suffering of the individual animal is ethically flawed. It risks violating the spirit, if not the letter, of Alabama's animal cruelty statutes by allowing preventable suffering to continue for the sake of a theoretical future benefit. This approach fails to acknowledge the intrinsic value of the individual animal's life and well-being. Another unacceptable approach is to ignore the situation entirely, hoping it resolves itself. This abdication of responsibility is professionally negligent and ethically indefensible. It allows suffering to persist and potentially worsen, and it undermines the credibility of the conservation program and the professionals involved. Such inaction could be interpreted as a failure to act in accordance with humane treatment principles. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on the immediate relief of suffering without considering the broader conservation implications, while well-intentioned, may not be the most responsible. It could lead to unintended consequences for the program's success, potentially jeopardizing the welfare of a larger population in the long run. The professional decision-making process should involve a rapid assessment of the animal's immediate welfare needs, consultation with relevant ethical guidelines and Alabama's animal welfare statutes, and a proactive effort to find solutions that integrate both individual welfare and program objectives. This often requires creative problem-solving and open communication with stakeholders. Question 9. Stakeholder feedback indicates a growing awareness among Alabama residents regarding the ethical treatment of animals. A concerned citizen in Mobile, Alabama, reports observing an animal in what they perceive as a state of neglect, exhibiting signs of poor health and inadequate living conditions. The citizen is passionate about animal rights theories, believing animals possess intrinsic value and should not be treated as mere property. Considering the legal landscape of Alabama, which of the following approaches best balances the citizen's ethical concerns with the practical and legal realities of ensuring animal welfare? Option A. Advising the owner to voluntarily surrender the animal based on philosophical arguments about animal rights, without involving official channels, hoping for a cooperative resolution. Option B. Organizing a community protest to demand the immediate removal of the animal from the owner's property, citing abstract ethical principles of animal personhood. Option C. Engaging in public advocacy to change Alabama's property laws regarding animals, arguing that animals should be recognized as sentient beings with rights that supersede owner discretion, without immediate reporting of the specific case. Option D. Documenting the observed conditions with evidence and reporting the situation to the Mobile County Animal Control or the local law enforcement agency, initiating a formal investigation under Alabama's animal cruelty statutes. The correct answer is D. Documenting the observed conditions with evidence and reporting the situation to the Mobile County Animal Control or the local law enforcement agency, initiating a formal investigation under Alabama's animal cruelty statutes. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the competing interests of animal welfare, owner rights, and public safety within the specific legal framework of Alabama. Professionals must navigate the nuances of animal rights theories to determine the most ethically and legally sound course of action when an animal's well-being is in question, particularly when faced with differing interpretations of an animal's status. Careful judgment is required to avoid both unnecessary intervention and neglect. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves prioritizing the animal's immediate welfare and safety by seeking legal avenues for intervention that are supported by Alabama's animal cruelty statutes and relevant case law. This approach acknowledges that, while animal rights theories offer different philosophical underpinnings, Alabama law provides specific protections against cruelty and neglect. Engaging with local animal control or law enforcement, and potentially initiating legal proceedings for animal protection orders or removal, aligns with the state's regulatory framework designed to prevent suffering. This is correct because it directly addresses the potential harm to the animal through established legal mechanisms, respecting the animal's right to be free from cruelty as defined by Alabama law. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to solely rely on a philosophical argument that animals have inherent rights equivalent to humans, without considering the specific legal protections and procedures available in Alabama. While this perspective might inform an ethical stance, it fails to provide a practical, legally actionable solution within the state's regulatory framework. Alabama law defines animal cruelty and provides remedies, and ignoring these established legal channels in favor of abstract philosophical debate is professionally inadequate and potentially harmful to the animal. Another incorrect approach is to defer to the owner's absolute discretion, assuming their interpretation of the animal's needs is always correct, even in the face of observable distress or neglect. This approach disregards Alabama's animal cruelty laws, which empower authorities and concerned citizens to intervene when an animal is suffering. It fails to recognize that legal and ethical obligations exist to protect animals from harm, regardless of the owner's personal beliefs or claims. A further incorrect approach is to advocate for the animal's immediate seizure and placement in a sanctuary based solely on a personal belief that the current environment is suboptimal, without first exhausting legal and procedural steps. While well-intentioned, this bypasses due process and the established legal framework for animal welfare cases in Alabama, potentially leading to legal challenges and undermining the credibility of animal welfare efforts. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that begins with a thorough assessment of the animal's condition and the relevant circumstances. This assessment should then be cross-referenced with Alabama's specific animal welfare laws and regulations. The next step involves identifying the most appropriate legal and procedural channels for intervention, which may include contacting animal control, law enforcement, or seeking legal counsel. Throughout this process, professionals must maintain objectivity, adhere to legal requirements, and prioritize the animal's welfare within the established legal and ethical boundaries of Alabama. Question 10. Regulatory review indicates a scenario in Alabama where a pet owner wishes to significantly reduce their spending on their dog's care, citing financial hardship. The owner proposes a daily expenditure of $5 for food and shelter, and a one-time veterinary visit budget of $200 for the next year. Given that Alabama Code Title 13A, Section 13A 11-241 mandates providing necessary sustenance, drink, shelter, and veterinary care, and assuming veterinary guidelines suggest a minimum of $15 per day for adequate food and shelter, and a baseline annual veterinary care cost of $500 to prevent suffering, and potential fines for neglect are $1,000 per documented instance. What is the minimum additional amount the owner must allocate annually to meet legal and ethical standards for their dog's care, and what is the total projected annual cost of compliance? Option A. The owner must allocate an additional $500 annually, bringing the total projected annual cost of compliance to $1,000. Option B. The owner must allocate an additional $7,300 annually, bringing the total projected annual cost of compliance to $10,950. Option C. The owner must allocate an additional $200 annually, bringing the total projected annual cost of compliance to $400. Option D. The owner must allocate an additional $3,650 annually, bringing the total projected annual cost of compliance to $7,300. The correct answer is B. The owner must allocate an additional $7,300 annually, bringing the total projected annual cost of compliance to $10,950. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between an animal's legal status as property and the ethical considerations of its welfare. In Alabama, like most jurisdictions, Animals are legally considered property, but there is a growing societal and regulatory expectation for their humane treatment. Navigating this requires a careful balancing act, ensuring compliance with property law while also adhering to animal cruelty statutes and ethical best practices. The financial implications add another layer of complexity, demanding a cost-benefit analysis that prioritizes legal and ethical obligations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a direct calculation of the minimum legally required expenditure for the animal's care, based on Alabama's animal cruelty statutes and veterinary guidelines, and comparing this to the potential financial liability if the animal's welfare is compromised. This approach correctly prioritizes legal compliance and risk mitigation. Alabama Code Title 13A, Chapter 11, Section 13A 11-241 defines cruelty to animals, and while it doesn't specify exact dollar amounts for care, it mandates providing necessary sustenance, drink, shelter, and veterinary care. Professional veterinary organizations provide cost estimates for basic care. Calculating the minimum required expenditure, let's say $15 per day for food and shelter, and $500 for a baseline veterinary visit, and then projecting potential fines or civil damages for neglect e.g. $1,000 per incident of documented neglect, ensures that the decision is grounded in legal requirements and potential financial consequences. If the owner's proposed expenditure is less than the calculated minimum required, the professional must advise on the legal shortfall. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to solely focus on the owner's stated budget without considering the legal minimums for care. This fails to acknowledge Alabama's animal cruelty laws, which impose a duty of care regardless of the owner's financial capacity. Ignoring these statutes can lead to legal penalties for the owner and professional liability for the advisor. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize the animal's welfare based on subjective emotional considerations, without a clear link to legal mandates or quantifiable financial risk. While empathy is important, professional advice must be rooted in objective legal and financial realities. This approach might lead to recommendations that are not legally enforceable or financially sustainable for the owner, creating a different set of problems. A further incorrect approach is to simply defer to the owner's wishes without any independent assessment of the animal's needs or the legal implications. This abdicates professional responsibility and fails to protect either the animal or the owner from potential legal repercussions. It ignores the advisor's duty to provide informed counsel based on applicable laws and ethical standards. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a framework that begins with identifying the relevant legal obligations under Alabama law, specifically the animal cruelty statutes. This should be followed by researching established veterinary guidelines for basic animal care to establish a minimum expenditure. The next step is to quantify the potential financial risks associated with noncompliance, including fines and civil damages. Finally, the professional should compare the owner's proposed budget against these legally mandated minimums and potential liabilities, providing clear, data-driven advice that prioritizes legal compliance and responsible animal stewardship. Question 11. Performance analysis shows that an animal shelter in Alabama is facing a critical shortage of veterinary staff and supplies, with several animals exhibiting varying degrees of distress and injury. Considering the principles of utilitarianism and the Alabama Animal Welfare Act, which approach best addresses the ethical and legal obligations in this resource-constrained environment. Option A. Prioritize treatment for animals with the most severe suffering and the highest likelihood of successful recovery, allocating limited resources to maximize overall well-being. Option B. Focus on treating animals that are most likely to be adopted quickly, as this frees up resources and space for other animals. Option C. Address the most straightforward and least resource-intensive cases first to clear the backlog efficiently. Option D. Treat animals strictly in the order they were admitted to the shelter, ensuring no animal is overlooked regardless of their condition. The correct answer is A. Prioritize treatment for animals with the most severe suffering and the highest likelihood of successful recovery, allocating limited resources to maximize overall well-being. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate needs of multiple stakeholders with differing priorities, all within the framework of Alabama animal welfare laws. The veterinarian must make a decision that maximizes overall well-being, while adhering to legal and ethical obligations, which can be complex when resources are limited and suffering is present. Careful judgment is required to avoid unintended negative consequences and ensure compliance with the Alabama Animal Welfare Act. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves prioritizing the animals with the most severe suffering and the highest probability of successful intervention, thereby maximizing the overall reduction of suffering and potential for positive outcomes. This approach aligns with utilitarian principles by seeking the greatest good for the greatest number of animals. Specifically, it involves a systematic assessment of each animal's condition, prognosis, and the resources required for treatment. By focusing on those most in need and most likely to benefit, the veterinarian ethically and legally fulfills their duty of care under Alabama law, which mandates humane treatment and prevention of cruelty. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to treat the animals in the order they arrived at the shelter, regardless of their condition. This fails to address the most urgent needs and could lead to prolonged suffering for animals in critical states, potentially violating the spirit and letter of Alabama's anti-cruelty statutes. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize animals based on their perceived adoptability or potential for generating revenue for the shelter. This is ethically unsound, as it devalues animals based on external factors rather than their intrinsic need for care, and could be seen as a failure to provide equitable treatment under the law. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on treating the easiest cases first, without considering the severity of suffering in others, neglects the utilitarian goal of minimizing overall harm and could result in preventable suffering for more severely afflicted animals. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a thorough assessment of the situation, identifying all relevant stakeholders and their needs. This is followed by an evaluation of available resources and potential interventions. Applying ethical frameworks, such as utilitarianism, helps in weighing competing interests and determining the course of action that yields the most beneficial outcome for the largest number of individuals. In this context, it means prioritizing based on the severity of suffering and the likelihood of positive intervention, ensuring compliance with all applicable Alabama statutes and regulations. Question 12. Market research demonstrates that a large agricultural operation in rural Alabama, primarily focused on livestock production, is facing scrutiny for its waste management practices, which are alleged to be contributing to local water pollution and negatively impacting wildlife habitats, while simultaneously raising concerns about the living conditions of the animals themselves. An animal welfare advocate, informed by eco-feminist principles, is tasked with developing a strategy to address these interconnected issues. Which of the following strategies best aligns with eco-feminist tenets and professional ethical obligations in Alabama? Option A. Focus solely on improving the direct physical conditions of the livestock, such as enclosure size and feeding, while disregarding the broader environmental impact of the farm's waste disposal. Option B. Prioritize the immediate cessation of all operations at the farm, citing the severe environmental damage and animal welfare concerns, without exploring potential for reform or alternative practices. Option C. Emphasize the economic contributions of the farm to the local Alabama economy and argue against any changes that might disrupt its current operational model. Option D. Advocate for the implementation of comprehensive sustainable farming initiatives that integrate humane animal husbandry with environmentally responsible waste management and land use practices, seeking collaboration with the farm to transition towards these methods. The correct answer is D. Advocate for the implementation of comprehensive sustainable farming initiatives that integrate humane animal husbandry with environmentally responsible waste management and land use practices, seeking collaboration with the farm to transition towards these methods. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an animal welfare advocate in Alabama due to the interconnectedness of environmental degradation and the exploitation of animals, a core tenet of ecofeminism. The advocate must navigate the complex ethical landscape where agricultural practices, while potentially providing economic benefits, can inflict significant harm on both the environment and the animals involved. Balancing the immediate needs of the animals with broader ecological concerns and potential community impacts requires careful judgment and a nuanced understanding of Alabama's specific animal welfare and environmental regulations. Correct approach analysis. The most ethically sound and professionally responsible approach involves advocating for the adoption of sustainable agricultural practices that prioritize animal well-being and minimize environmental impact. This approach directly addresses the ecofeminist concern by recognizing the intrinsic link between the oppression of women and the exploitation of nature, including animals. In Alabama, this would translate to supporting initiatives that promote humane treatment of livestock, reduce waste and pollution from farms, and encourage biodiversity. Such practices align with the spirit of Alabama's animal cruelty laws, which, while primarily focused on direct harm, can be interpreted to encompass systemic neglect and environmentally damaging practices that indirectly harm animals. Ethically, this approach upholds the principle of non-maleficence by actively seeking to prevent harm to both animals and the environment. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves solely focusing on the economic benefits of the agricultural operation without adequately considering the welfare of the animals or the environmental consequences. This fails to acknowledge the ecofeminist perspective that views the exploitation of animals and the environment as stemming from similar patriarchal systems. Ethically, this approach neglects the duty of care owed to the animals and the broader responsibility to environmental stewardship, potentially violating the spirit, if not the letter, of Alabama's animal protection statutes by prioritizing profit over well-being. Another flawed approach is to advocate for the immediate closure of the farm without exploring alternative, more sustainable practices. While driven by a desire to end animal suffering, this approach may overlook the economic realities of the community and the potential for positive change through reform. It fails to engage in a constructive dialogue that could lead to long-term solutions aligned with ecofeminist principles of interconnectedness and systemic change. This approach risks alienating stakeholders and may not achieve the most beneficial outcome for the animals or the environment in the long run. A further unacceptable approach is to ignore the environmental impact of the farm's operations, focusing exclusively on the direct physical well-being of the animals. This compartmentalized view misses the ecofeminist understanding that environmental degradation directly impacts animal habitats and health. Alabama's environmental regulations, though separate from animal welfare laws, are designed to protect ecosystems that are vital for animal life. Failing to consider these interconnected issues represents a significant ethical and professional failing. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should adopt a holistic problem-solving framework. This begins with a thorough assessment of the situation, gathering information on both animal welfare conditions and environmental practices. Next, they should engage in stakeholder dialogue, including farmers, community members, and regulatory bodies in Alabama. The goal should be to identify and promote solutions that are both ethically sound and practically implementable, aligning with ecofeminist principles of interconnectedness and justice for all beings. This involves advocating for policy changes, supporting educational initiatives, and championing sustainable practices that benefit animals, the environment, and the community. Question 13. The evaluation methodology shows that a concerned neighbor in Mobile, Alabama, reports persistent concerns about the living conditions of several dogs at a nearby property, alleging neglect and inadequate shelter. The neighbor has provided specific details about the animal's appearance and behavior, but has no direct photographic or video evidence. What is the most appropriate course of action for an animal welfare advocate to take in this situation? Adhering strictly to Alabama law and ethical best practices. Option A. Document the neighbor's concerns thoroughly and advise them on how to file a formal complaint with the Mobile County Animal Control or the appropriate law enforcement agency, offering to provide support in gathering further information if legally permissible. Option B. Ignore the neighbor's concerns due to the lack of concrete evidence and the potential for a false accusation. Option C. Advise the neighbor to trespass onto the property to gather photographic evidence of the alleged neglect. Option D. Immediately contact the property owner directly to confront them about the allegations and demand immediate improvements to the animal's living conditions. The correct answer is A. Document the neighbor's concerns thoroughly and advise them on how to file a formal complaint with the Mobile County Animal Control or the appropriate law enforcement agency, offering to provide support in gathering further information if legally permissible. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that this scenario is professionally challenging due to the inherent conflict between property rights and animal welfare concerns, particularly when dealing with potentially neglected or abused animals. Alabama law, like many jurisdictions, balances the rights of pet owners with the state's interest in preventing animal cruelty. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing interests without infringing on constitutional rights, while ensuring the safety and well-being of the animals. The best professional approach involves a thorough investigation based on credible evidence and adherence to established legal procedures for animal seizure and welfare checks in Alabama. This includes consulting with local animal control officers or law enforcement who are authorized to act under Alabama Code Title 3, Chapter 11, Cruelty to Animals. This approach is correct because it prioritizes due process for the owner, while ensuring the animal's immediate safety if warranted by evidence of neglect or abuse. It aligns with the legal framework that requires probable cause or exigent circumstances for intervention, and it respects the established roles of authorities in animal welfare cases. An incorrect approach would be to immediately seize the animals based solely on a neighbor's unsubstantiated complaint, without any independent verification or legal authorization. This fails to respect the property rights of the owner and bypasses the necessary legal safeguards. Such an action could lead to legal challenges for wrongful seizure and a violation of due process rights. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the complaint entirely, even if it is detailed and persistent, without any attempt at investigation. This would be a failure to act on potential evidence of animal cruelty, which could have severe ethical and legal consequences if animals are later found to be suffering. Alabama law imposes a duty to investigate credible reports of animal abuse. Finally, attempting to resolve the issue through informal intimidation or harassment of the owner, rather than through official channels, is professionally unacceptable. This approach lacks legal standing, can escalate the situation, and does not provide a framework for addressing the animal welfare concerns in a legally sound manner. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that begins with gathering all available information, assessing its credibility, and then consulting the relevant Alabama statutes and local ordinances. If there is sufficient evidence to suggest a violation of animal welfare laws, the next step is to involve the appropriate authorities, e.g., animal control, law enforcement, who can legally initiate an investigation and, if necessary, obtain warrants for seizure. This systematic, legally compliant process ensures that both animal welfare and individual rights are appropriately considered. Question 14. The monitoring system demonstrates a pattern of stray dogs exhibiting aggressive behavior in a specific neighborhood within Jefferson County, Alabama. Considering the potential for public safety concerns and the existing regulatory framework in Alabama, what is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for animal control officers to take in response to these reports? Option A. Rely solely on community complaints and anecdotal reports of aggressive behavior to justify impounding any stray dogs of certain breeds found in the area, without further individual investigation. Option B. Initiate a comprehensive investigation focusing on the individual behavior of the dogs involved, documenting specific incidents of aggression, and following the procedures outlined in Alabama's Dangerous Dog Act for identifying and managing potentially dangerous animals, regardless of their breed. Option C. Adopt a policy of automatic impoundment and potential euthanasia for any stray dog of a specific breed found roaming freely in the neighborhood, without prior behavioral assessment or owner notification. Option D. Immediately implement breed-specific restrictions or bans on any dogs identified as belonging to breeds commonly associated with aggression in the affected neighborhood, based on the observed breed of the stray animals. The correct answer is B. Initiate a comprehensive investigation focusing on the individual behavior of the dogs involved, documenting specific incidents of aggression, and following the procedures outlined in Alabama's Dangerous Dog Act for identifying and managing potentially dangerous animals, regardless of their breed. Explanation. The monitoring system demonstrates a recurring pattern of stray dogs exhibiting aggressive behavior in a specific neighborhood within Jefferson County, Alabama. This situation presents a professional challenge due to the potential for public safety risks and the need to balance community concerns with animal welfare and legal compliance. The county's approach to animal control must be informed by Alabama law, particularly regarding dangerous dogs and breed-specific legislation, BSL. The best professional approach involves a comprehensive investigation that adheres to established legal protocols for identifying and managing dangerous animals, without prematurely targeting specific breeds. This means focusing on the individual animal's behavior and documented incidents, rather than making assumptions based on breed. Alabama law, specifically the Dangerous Dog Act, ALA. Code Section 3-1-3 et sec. outlines procedures for declaring a dog dangerous based on its actions, requiring evidence of a bite or attack that causes injury or death, or a dog that has been trained or used for fighting. This approach prioritizes objective evidence and due process for the animal owner, aligning with the principle that dangerousness is an individual trait, not an inherent breed characteristic. It also avoids the legal and ethical pitfalls associated with BSL, which is often criticized for being ineffective, discriminatory, and difficult to enforce consistently. An incorrect approach would be to immediately implement breed-specific restrictions or bans based solely on the observed breed of the stray dogs. This fails to comply with Alabama's Dangerous Dog Act, which mandates an individualized assessment of an animal's behavior. Such an approach would be legally vulnerable, as it presumes guilt or dangerousness based on breed alone, which is not the standard established by state law. Ethically, it is problematic as it punishes animals and owners for the perceived characteristics of a breed rather than for actual dangerous actions. Another incorrect approach would be to rely on anecdotal evidence or community complaints without initiating a formal investigation or documenting specific incidents. While community feedback is important, it must be substantiated by factual reporting and evidence to trigger legal action under Alabama's dangerous dog statutes. Proceeding solely on hearsay or general sentiment risks overreach and misapplication of animal control resources. A further incorrect approach would be to adopt a policy that automatically assumes any dog of a certain breed found at large is dangerous and subject to immediate impoundment or euthanasia, without proper identification and behavioral assessment. This bypasses the legal requirements for due process and evidence gathering, potentially leading to wrongful seizure of animals and legal challenges. Professionals in animal control should employ a decision-making framework that begins with thorough fact-finding and adherence to established legal procedures. This involves documenting all incidents, gathering witness statements, and following the specific steps outlined in Alabama's Dangerous Dog Act for investigation, identification, and management of potentially dangerous animals. This ensures that actions are legally sound, ethically defensible, and focused on actual public safety concerns rather than breed stereotypes. Question 15. Process analysis reveals that a veterinarian practicing in Jefferson County, Alabama, has received a stray dog exhibiting signs of neglect. While the veterinarian is aware of the Alabama Department of Agriculture and Industries guidelines regarding the care of stray animals, they are unsure if any specific local ordinances in Jefferson County might impose additional requirements or procedures for handling such cases. What is the most appropriate course of action for the veterinarian to ensure full compliance with all applicable laws and regulations? Option A. Proceed with treating the animal based on general veterinary best practices and state guidelines, and only address local ordinances if directly contacted by local authorities. Option B. Rely solely on the Alabama Department of Agriculture and Industries guidelines, assuming state law preempts any potentially conflicting local ordinances. Option C. Proactively consult the Jefferson County Animal Control Ordinance and relevant municipal codes for any specific requirements regarding the intake, care, and reporting of stray animals, in addition to adhering to state guidelines. Option D. Contact the Alabama Department of Agriculture and Industries to inquire if they are aware of any specific local ordinances in Jefferson County that might apply. The correct answer is C. Proactively consult the Jefferson County Animal Control Ordinance and relevant municipal codes for any specific requirements regarding the intake, care, and reporting of stray animals, in addition to adhering to state guidelines. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires navigating the complexities of overlapping regulatory authority between state and local governments concerning animal welfare and public safety. A veterinarian must balance their professional obligations to animal health with the legal requirements imposed by local ordinances, which can vary significantly even within the same state. Misinterpreting or ignoring these local rules can lead to legal penalties, harm to animals, and damage to the veterinarian's reputation. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance while advocating for the best interests of the animal. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively identifying and adhering to the specific local ordinances of the county or municipality where the animal is located, in addition to state laws. This approach ensures comprehensive compliance with all applicable regulations. In Alabama, the Alabama Department of Agriculture and Industries oversees state-level animal welfare laws, but individual counties and cities often enact their own ordinances regarding animal control, licensing, and public health nuisances. A veterinarian must consult the relevant local government's animal control or health department to understand these specific requirements. This proactive stance demonstrates a commitment to both legal compliance and responsible practice within the community. Incorrect approaches analysis. Failing to consult local ordinances and relying solely on state law is an incorrect approach because it ignores the legally binding nature of local regulations. While state laws provide a baseline, local ordinances can impose stricter requirements or address issues not covered at the state level. For example, a county might have specific leash laws or regulations on the number of animals permitted per household that are not detailed in state statutes. Assuming that state law preempts all local ordinances is also incorrect. In Alabama, local governments have the authority to enact ordinances that are not in conflict with state law. Animal control and public health are areas where local governments frequently exercise this authority. Ignoring a local ordinance because it seems overly burdensome or inconvenient is a serious ethical and legal failure. Professional obligations include operating within the legal framework established by all levels of government. Disregarding a valid ordinance can result in fines, license suspension, or other disciplinary actions. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a tiered approach to regulatory compliance. First, understand the overarching state laws and regulations governing their practice and the specific subject matter, in this case, animal welfare in Alabama. Second, actively research and identify any local ordinances enacted by the county and municipality where their practice is located or where their services are being rendered. This often involves checking the websites of county commissions, city councils, or local animal control agencies. Third, maintain a system for tracking and updating knowledge of these regulations, as they can change. When in doubt, consulting with legal counsel specializing in animal law or local government regulations is advisable. Question 16. Market research demonstrates that veterinary clinics in Alabama frequently encounter situations where owners present animals for euthanasia or surrender due to financial hardship, but then fail to return for the animal or provide further contact. In such a scenario, what is the most legally and ethically sound course of action for a veterinarian in Alabama? Option A. Release the animal back into the community where it was found, assuming the owner has abandoned it. Option B. Immediately transfer the animal to a private rescue organization without any formal documentation or notification to local authorities. Option C. Thoroughly document the owner's stated intentions and financial inability to care for the animal. Contact local animal control or a registered humane society to report the animal as a potential surrender or stray, and follow their guidance for intake and care. Option D. Keep the animal at the clinic indefinitely until a new owner can be found, without notifying any official animal welfare organizations. The correct answer is C. Thoroughly document the owner's stated intentions and financial inability to care for the animal. Contact local animal control or a registered humane society to report the animal as a potential surrender or stray, and follow their guidance for intake and care. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate needs of an animal with the legal requirements for animal ownership and potential abandonment, all within the specific legal framework of Alabama. A veterinarian must exercise careful judgment to avoid both legal repercussions and ethical breaches. The best professional approach involves documenting the situation thoroughly and contacting the appropriate authorities. This approach is correct because Alabama law, while prioritizing animal welfare, also outlines procedures for handling stray or surrendered animals. By contacting the local animal control or a humane society, the veterinarian is acting in accordance with the spirit of animal protection laws and initiating the proper legal channels for the animal's care and potential reharming. This also protects the veterinarian and the clinic from potential liability related to the animal's unknown history or the owner's actions. An incorrect approach would be to simply keep the animal without attempting to locate the owner or notify authorities. This could be construed as unlawful possession of an animal, especially if the owner later surfaces and can prove ownership. Ethically, it bypasses established procedures for animal welfare and surrender, potentially delaying the animal from receiving appropriate care or finding a permanent home through official channels. Another incorrect approach is to immediately surrender the animal to a private rescue organization without any documentation or attempt to contact the owner or local animal control. While well-intentioned, this bypasses legal requirements for animal intake and transfer of responsibility. It could lead to complications if the original owner is found, or if the rescue organization is not equipped to handle the animal's specific needs or legal status. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to simply release the animal back into the environment where it was found. This is ethically irresponsible and potentially illegal under Alabama's animal cruelty and abandonment laws. It puts the animal at risk of harm, disease, or becoming a nuisance, and fails to address the underlying issue of the owner's inability or unwillingness to care for the animal. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes animal welfare while strictly adhering to state and local regulations. This involves thorough documentation of all interactions, clear communication with clients, and a proactive approach to contacting relevant animal welfare authorities when faced with situations involving potentially abandoned or surrendered animals. Question 17. Cost-benefit analysis shows that immediate veterinary care for a stray animal is crucial, but Alabama law dictates specific procedures for handling such animals. A veterinarian in rural Alabama finds a healthy stray dog with no identification tags. What is the most legally compliant and ethically sound course of action for the veterinarian to take? Option A. Immediately contact the local animal control agency or sheriff's department to report the stray animal and follow their guidance. Option B. Attempt to find a new home for the animal by personally contacting friends and colleagues. Option C. Begin advertising the animal for adoption on social media and screen potential new owners. Option D. Keep the animal at the veterinary clinic indefinitely until a suitable owner is found through personal efforts. Correct answer is A. Immediately contact the local animal control agency or sheriff's department to report the stray animal and follow their guidance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate needs of an animal with the legal requirements for reporting and handling stray animals in Alabama. The veterinarian must act ethically and compassionately, while also adhering to state statutes designed to protect animal welfare and facilitate reunification with owners or proper placement. Failure to follow the correct legal procedures can result in penalties and compromise the animal's welfare. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves immediately contacting the local animal control agency or sheriff's department in the relevant Alabama county. This aligns with Alabama Code Title III, Chapter 10, which outlines the duties of animal control officers and the procedures for handling stray animals. Prompt reporting ensures that the animal is entered into the proper system, allowing for potential owner identification and adherence to holding periods before adoption or other disposition. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and the animal's best interests by utilizing the established framework for stray animal management. Incorrect approach is analysis. Initiating adoption procedures without contacting authorities fails to comply with Alabama's statutory requirements for stray animals. This bypasses the legal holding periods and notification processes designed to reunite pets with their owners, potentially leading to the unlawful disposition of an animal that is still legally owned. Attempting to locate a new owner independently and transferring ownership without involving the designated animal control or law enforcement agencies is a violation of Alabama law. This circumvents the legal framework for stray animal intake and disposition, which is in place to ensure proper care and prevent the illegal sale or transfer of animals. Keeping the animal indefinitely without reporting it to the appropriate authorities in Alabama constitutes a failure to follow the state's statutes regarding found animals. This deprives the animal of the opportunity to be reunited with its rightful owner and prevents it from entering the formal system for care and potential reharming, which is a breach of professional and legal responsibility. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Alabama should adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes understanding and adhering to the specific state statutes governing animal welfare and stray animals. When encountering a stray animal, the immediate step should be to consult the relevant sections of the Alabama Code, e.g., Title 3, Chapter 10, to understand reporting requirements, holding periods, and authorized disposition methods. This proactive approach ensures that actions taken are legally sound and ethically responsible, safeguarding both the animal's welfare and the professional's compliance. Question 18. Market research demonstrates a growing client interest in socially responsible investing within the animal welfare sector. A financial advisor based in Alabama is considering recommending investments in commercial animal breeding facilities. Given the variations in state laws regarding animal welfare and the definition of puppy mills, which approach best ensures compliance with Alabama's regulatory framework and ethical investment practices? Option A. Rely on general federal guidelines for animal welfare and commercial breeding operations, assuming they encompass the necessary standards for all states. Option B. Recommend investments in any facility that meets basic federal registration requirements for commercial breeders, without further investigation into their operational practices or state-specific compliance. Option C. Thoroughly research and adhere to Alabama's specific statutes and regulations concerning animal breeding facilities, care standards, and prohibited practices, ensuring all recommended investments align with these state-specific requirements. Option D. Base investment decisions on the animal welfare laws of neighboring states, assuming similar regulatory environments exist in Alabama. The correct answer is C. Thoroughly research and adhere to Alabama's specific statutes and regulations concerning animal breeding facilities, care standards, and prohibited practices, ensuring all recommended investments align with these state-specific requirements. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires navigating the nuanced differences in animal welfare legislation across different states, specifically concerning the definition and regulation of puppy mills and the standards for animal care facilities. A financial advisor must ensure their recommendations align with both federal regulations and the specific laws of Alabama, which may have stricter or more lenient provisions than other states. Careful judgment is required to avoid recommending investments that could inadvertently support practices deemed unethical or illegal in Alabama, even if permissible elsewhere. The best professional practice involves thoroughly researching and understanding Alabama's specific animal welfare laws, including any statutes or regulations that define or prohibit certain breeding practices, establish minimum care standards for animals in commercial facilities, and outline penalties for violations. This approach ensures that investment recommendations are compliant with the jurisdiction's legal framework and ethical standards. By prioritizing Alabama's specific regulatory environment, the advisor can confidently guide clients toward investments that are not only financially sound, but also ethically responsible within the state's legal boundaries. Recommending investments based solely on general federal guidelines for animal welfare, without considering Alabama's specific statutes, is professionally unacceptable. Federal guidelines often set a baseline, but individual states can enact more stringent regulations. Failing to acknowledge these state-specific nuances could lead to investments in facilities that, while technically compliant with federal law, violate Alabama's stricter standards, exposing the client and the advisor to reputational and potential legal risks. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to assume that practices permitted in neighboring states are automatically acceptable in Alabama. Each state develops its own legislative framework based on its unique social values and concerns regarding animal welfare. Relying on the laws of another state without verifying Alabama's specific requirements is a significant oversight. Finally, advising clients to invest in any facility that meets basic federal registration requirements, without further due diligence into their operational practices and compliance with Alabama law, is also professionally unsound. Federal registration is a preliminary step and does not guarantee adherence to state-level animal welfare standards, which are often more detailed and protective of animal well-being. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the specific jurisdiction of concern, Alabama. Next, they must conduct targeted research into that jurisdiction's relevant laws and regulations. This is followed by an assessment of how potential investments align with these specific legal requirements and ethical considerations. Finally, clear communication with the client about the rationale behind the recommendations, emphasizing compliance with local laws, is crucial. Question 19. Governance review demonstrates that a concerned citizen has observed conditions suggesting potential neglect of several dogs at a property in rural Alabama. The citizen has taken clear, objective photographs and written detailed notes about the animals' apparent lack of food, water, and shelter, as well as their emaciated appearance. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the citizen to take next under Alabama state animal cruelty laws? Option A. Remove the dogs from the property themselves and provide them with immediate care, intending to notify authorities later. Option B. Immediately contact the local county sheriff's department or animal control agency and provide them with all documented observations and photographic evidence. Option C. Confront the property owner directly, present the evidence, and demand immediate improvements to the animal's living conditions. Option D. Post the photographs and detailed notes on social media to raise public awareness and pressure for action. The correct answer is B. Immediately contact the local county sheriff's department or animal control agency and provide them with all documented observations and photographic evidence. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need to address potential animal suffering with the legal requirements for evidence gathering and due process. A hasty or improperly documented intervention could jeopardize the investigation and the welfare of the animals in the long run. Careful judgment is required to ensure that actions taken are both effective in protecting the animals and legally sound under Alabama law. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately contacting the local animal control agency or law enforcement and providing them with detailed, objective observations of the animal's condition and environment. This approach is correct because Alabama law, specifically the Alabama Animal Cruelty Act, ALA, Code Section 13A11-240 et sec., grants authority to law enforcement officers and animal control officers to investigate suspected cases of animal cruelty and to seize animals when there is probable cause to believe they are being subjected to neglect or abuse. By involving the designated authorities, you ensure that the intervention is conducted by individuals with the legal standing and training to properly assess the situation, gather evidence, and take appropriate legal action, including seizure if necessary, in accordance with established procedures. This upholds due process and maximizes the likelihood of a successful prosecution and long-term protection for the animals. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately remove the animals from the property without involving authorities. This is a regulatory failure because it bypasses the legal framework established by the Alabama Animal Cruelty Act, which outlines the specific procedures for seizure and impoundment. Such an action could be construed as theft or unauthorized removal of property, potentially hindering any subsequent legal proceedings and leaving the animals in an uncertain state without proper care or legal oversight. Another incorrect approach is to only document the conditions and take no further action. This is an ethical and regulatory failure because it neglects the professional responsibility to act when witnessing potential animal suffering. While documentation is important, inaction when there is a clear indication of cruelty or neglect violates the spirit and intent of animal protection laws and fails to provide immediate relief to the animals. A third incorrect approach is to confront the owner directly and demand immediate changes without involving authorities. While communication can be a part of resolving issues, this approach can escalate the situation, lead to confrontation, and may not result in the necessary legal intervention or evidence gathering required for a successful case under Alabama law. It also risks the owner concealing or further harming the animals before authorities can intervene. Professional reasoning. Professionals encountering such situations should follow a structured decision-making process. First, observe and meticulously document all relevant details objectively. Second, identify the appropriate legal authorities responsible for animal welfare enforcement in Alabama, e.g., local animal control, sheriff's department, police. Third, contact these authorities promptly, providing them with the detailed information gathered. Fourth, cooperate fully with the authorities throughout their investigation. This systematic approach ensures that actions are legally compliant, ethically sound, and most effective in protecting animal welfare. Question 20. The audit findings indicate a pattern of delayed initial investigations for animal cruelty complaints filed with the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. To assess compliance with the spirit of Alabama's animal cruelty statutes, which implicitly require timely intervention, the Sheriff's Office has collected data on the number of days between the filing of a complaint and the first investigative action for the past fiscal year. If 120 complaints were filed, and the total number of days from complaint filing to initial investigation across all these complaints summed to 480 days, what is the average response time in days per complaint? Option A, an estimated 5 days based on a sample of 20 complaints. Option B, the number of successful prosecutions. Option C, 4 days. Option D, 120 complaints. Correct answer is C, 4 days. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a recurring issue with timely reporting of animal cruelty incidents in Jefferson County, Alabama. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the urgency of animal welfare with the procedural requirements of enforcement, potentially impacting resource allocation and the effectiveness of investigations. Accurate calculation of response times is crucial for demonstrating compliance with Alabama's animal cruelty statutes and for identifying systemic delays. The best approach involves a precise calculation of the average response time for reported animal cruelty incidents, using the formula for the mean, and comparing this to the statutory benchmarks outlined in the Code of Alabama. This method ensures objectivity and provides a data-driven basis for identifying areas needing improvement. Specifically, it requires summing the total days from report to initial investigation for all incidents and dividing by the number of incidents. For example, if incidents were reported on days 1, 3, and 7, and investigations occurred on days 2, 5, and 10 respectively, the response times would be 1 day, 2 days, and 3 days. The average response time would be /frac1 plus 2 plus 3 equals 2 days. This calculation directly addresses the audit's concern by quantifying the problem according to established legal and procedural standards. An incorrect approach would be to simply count the number of incidents reported without calculating the average response time. This fails to quantify the severity or duration of the delay, making it impossible to assess compliance with statutory response expectations. Another incorrect approach would be to estimate the average response time based on anecdotal evidence or a small, unrepresentative sample of cases. This lacks the rigor required for an official audit and could lead to inaccurate conclusions and ineffective corrective actions. Finally, focusing solely on the number of successful prosecutions without considering the timeliness of the initial response overlooks a critical component of effective animal cruelty enforcement, as delays can compromise evidence and the welfare of the animal. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the specific statutory requirements for response times in Alabama. They should then establish a clear methodology for data collection and calculation, ensuring all relevant incidents are included. Utilizing precise mathematical formulas for calculating averages and comparing these results against legal benchmarks provides a robust and defensible assessment of enforcement performance.